So it probably isn't going to, because those AI chips, the 10 nanometers and smaller, those are the ones we're most likely to lose and not have for about a decade while we rebuild the structured environment that allows us to build them at scale. Now, they're not going to go to zero, but we're going to have to choose what we're going to put them into. Do we put into EVs? Do we put into power management systems where, there's one of those chips is in every smart meter for a house that also has solar panels. So that, in theory, is a bigger market than what we do for iPhones. Or do we put them in electric vehicles? Or do we put them in server farms? Because we're not going to have enough for all of that. We're going to have enough probably for one of those applications. And until we have that shortage, we haven't made up that decision. But the idea that we're going to be doing this at scale and have massive server farms with millions of these chips, that can't happen. Now, with ChatGPT, we're seeing that this technology has probably now passed the operational stage. So all we need are the chips. The question is, how long is it going to take us to rebuild that pipeline? And I would say 8 to 12 years. All of this is very inflationary because we're trying to do a lot with limited supply of capital and labor. If we do succeed in building the infrastructure down into central Mexico, and the industrial plant does take form the way that the market seems like it's going to push for, it's going to be the same thing we did here. When we gobbled up all available labor in roughly 1990, just kind of put a stake in the ground, we found out we had to go up market. And we had to get better at using capital and labor more effectively, and that's when we saw our productivity skyrocket. I would expect that we would have a secondary issue like that in the United States, and then Mexico will go through a 1990s style boom as they are forced to move up the value-added scale. Now, Mexico over the last 30 years has moved up the value-added scale at a faster rate than any country ever before. They're on average, I'd say, twice as productive as the average Chinese, and their compensation is less than half as much. So they're already skewing towards being amazing. This will just speed it up, but it will be inflationary. Two things. Number one, the type of work we're probably going to see have the most price pressure is machine shops. It's a skill set that expands pretty quickly, but on small scale. And we're going to have to do a lot of the manufacturing and the maintenance for things that you would normally just buy an entirely new component relatively close to your headquarters, because it's going to have to be a patch job. We're not going to have the production that's necessary. Second, you're probably all going to have to establish training programs, not in high schools, but in elementary schools, to build your own inflow for these jobs. Because in an environment of very strict and increasing labor shortages, whoever gets their hooks into the kids first is likely to be the ones who then get the labor when it's time. And the time to start on that was yesterday. Because we have to wait for the millennials' kids to enter the market. That's 2045. And so you're all fighting for a small pool of antisocial children. The information vacuum in China now, it's impossible to know whether or not there's going to be an attack, because Xi doesn't talk with anyone. There's no one's phone you can bug to find out what he's thinking. Also, if the Chinese were to make a move on Taiwan, even if they capture it in a matter of 6 weeks without a shot fired, they don't know how to operate those semiconductor facilities because they can't operate their own. They use imported labor to do all of the quality checks on all of the wafers. And the ones in Taiwan are the world's most advanced. The ones in China are very much the other side. So if they got them, they would just be big paperweights, and obviously that would remove semiconductors for the rest of us, but it wouldn't really help them technologically. And it would trigger, among other things, the United States to act militarily. And it's not like we would confront the Chinese in the South China Sea or anything. We'd probably just put a couple destroyers in the Indian Ocean basin and cut the energy flow and cut the ability of them to import the things they need to grow their own food. So China would be facing a national collapse within a couple of years if they do pull the trigger on Taiwan. Normally, I would say that this would mean that they wouldn't even consider it. But again, Xi is now in an information black box, and we can't rule it out. All I can tell you for sure is that one way or another, some country involved in the supply chain somewhere is going to crack. I'm actually more concerned about Germany than I am about Taiwan, but it would have the same impact. The Germans specifically make the lenses that allow all of the lithography to happen. No lenses, no lithography, no chips. The hope, because people seem to like me to say things that are hopeful, is that there is a new lithography technology that is coming out that has fewer parts and doesn't require neon, which we're dependent on the Russians and the Chinese for, that might have a simpler supply chain. But if we ironed out all the kinks of that today, it's not going to be applied at scale in Taiwan within 3 years. So there are potentially ways forward here, but I find it unlikely that we're going to be able to avoid a disruption in that specific market. It's too vulnerable to too many things. But probably not that one. Probably. If it does happen, well then it's all gone. Yeah. All world leaders, democratic or otherwise, have problems with narcissism and ego. We're not immune to that. The question is how honest you are about your own capacity. So Putin has also established a bit of a cult of personality and has also purged the system of people who might rise up to replace him. But he started from a much lower base, which has shaped how much he's willing to carve out. So at the end of the Cold War, let me go back, 1983, there was a coup in the Soviet Union. And the intelligence services took over, purged all the other factions from the Communist Party. This is the Andropov coup. And Andropov, Chernomyrdin, and Gorbachev, they were the first three, ran the country until the end. Putin is part of that clique, and the intelligence professionals took over after the fall and have run it until now. And Putin has bit by bit removed people who he thought was threatening, and he hasn't done a lot to bring up a new generation from below. So Putin's inner circle today is less than 10 people, half of whom are utterly incompetent. If you ever see anything by Dmitry Medvedev, the former president, he's the most incompetent of them. You can ignore whatever he says. But there are a few of them that actually do provide him with advice and context. So I think the best example I can give you is if you go back to the January before the March, and the words. March, just after the war began, when Putin was making all the nuclear threats, the US ambassador was dispatched, and the message was something like this, like, Mr. President, just think of things from a little different angle here. You remember back in January when you decided and you gave the order for the day the war was going to start, and you were in the bunker under the Kremlin that was completely sealed. It was walk-in safe, no electronics, no notes. And an hour after you left that meeting, we published the notes of the meeting in the media. That was our way of telling you that we know where your person is at any given moment. So if you think you can fling a nuke into the Western Hemisphere, and the first half dozen we send back are going to go anywhere except straight up, you're out.